Hello, everyone. Welcome to Where Are All the Women? I'm Meghan Murphy. This is Mary Lou Singleton.
Hi, everybody.
I have a cold again, so apologies for my sneezing and sniffling. And if I start to act loopy, it's because I just took a bunch of meds. So, um, but hopefully I'll be fine and we'll do our best. How are you doing, Mary Lou?
I'm good. I had a whirlwind trip to Washington, D.C. to visit my son last week, and that was interesting and nice. And now I'm back in clinic, just working away. So things are good.
Cool. I went to Merida on the weekend for a wedding, and while I was away, Adelita ran away,
Oh, no.
and it was terrifying. It was like an hour before I was about to leave we were going to mass. The wedding was in a Catholic church,
Ah,
and which was very beautiful. But yeah, about an hour before my friend who was dog sitting for baby Adelita was like, she was at the beach with her daughter, who's like 17. Like I'd left her intentionally with the daughter. The daughter's good with dogs, but she was off
mm.
the leash, and Adelita has a habit of getting scared and she bolts. Like
Oh,
she
yeah.
if she gets scared, her little brain shuts down and she just runs. She's not done it with me, but I don't leave her.
Mm.
I let her off the leash very often because I know that she's bolted from people before, and she's just so little, and I don't know if she knows about cars, and there's big dogs
Yeah.
everywhere and blah blah blah. But in any case, she got scared by a big dog at the beach and ran, and so they were in a panic and looking for her. And I messaged everybody that I could think of. So other people went out to look for her and went to look for places she might go. I posted her photo and that she was lost. And we have a whole bunch of local WhatsApp groups here that people use for everything, like lost and found and food and events
Mm.
and buy and sell and housing and so on and so forth. So I posted it in these groups and was like panicked and didn't know what to do because I mean I'm not here. There's nothing I could do. And then I was supposed to be going to mass, so it's not like I can be at mass on my phone and texting or calling or anything.
Right.
And within like half an hour, maybe 45 minutes tops, someone called me and were like, "We have your dog. She's at our house."
Oh, good.
And I know. So she'd seen my message in one of the WhatsApp groups. Adelita also has a caller with her name and my number on it, but she'd seen my
Mm.
message in one of the WhatsApp groups like almost right away after I posted it. And Adelita, she was my neighbor. She lived right, like coincident. I don't think that they knew. I think they just saw it.
Oh.
And so Adelita had run all the way home from the beach,
Oh.
which is like, I don't know, at least a 15-minute walk for a little doggy, maybe even 20 minutes across the highway.
Oh, no.
So she ran home through the town, through all the roads, past all the scary dogs that sometimes try to eat her, across the highway all by herself to go to my house, and ended up at the neighbor's house. She has a little dog friend who lives at the neighbor's house, so maybe she went in there feeling safe to visit with her friend and she couldn't get into my place. So,
Oh.
and my downstairs neighbor was home, and so I called him, and he went next door and got Adelita from the neighbor and brought
Oh.
her back into town to give her to my other friend, who then took her for the next couple of days. But it was very scary, but also a huge relief. And I was like, oh gosh, I really love living in this town where things like that
Yeah.
happen so quickly, and everybody, people kind of know each other, and dogs get lost all the time. Like it's not that abnormal. It's not abnormal at all.
Mm.
Actually, it's routine for people to post about their lost dogs and all these groups. So she was
Oh.
terrified though when she got back down into town with my friend who she knows and took her, and she likes them. But yeah, she was terrified and shaking, and then I got home and we've been snuggling ever since. But it was, yeah, stressful. So I can't ever go anywhere without
No.
Adelita again. Emma doesn't run away. Emma's never run away in her entire life. She just wants to stay here. She's
Mm.
not much of a runner, but little Adelita has bolted several times now from
Mm.
people. So, but anyway.
Oh, Toby was a bolter and Foxy's a bolter. Like little dogs do that, and they shouldn't because they could get squished. I just would always, the squishing would make me scared.
I know. I was so scared that she was going to get squished by a car.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. Like, Emma doesn't understand about cars and trucks. She's just never learned that skill. And I have no idea if Adelita does because I've never tested it.
Right.
I'd have to see. I'll put her in the road and see what happens.
Yeah.
I sort of assume she does because she's from here and she was abandoned and not, I don't think, very well taken care of before I got her. I don't know exactly her situation, but I think they were sort of feral a little bit. So, and you know, the dogs that live here mostly, you know, they know about cars. Obviously accidents still happen sometimes, but not as much as you would think, considering there's dogs all over the road all the time.
Right.
But anyway, thank God. I was like, thank God she ran home. I mean, she could be anywhere in the whole town. How am I, like, who even knows where to look? And she's so little. I just kept picturing her, you know, hiding underneath something and nobody finds her ever. And then it's nighttime and then somebody eats her or steals her, squishes her or something.
But, I know. Well, now she just has to go with you everywhere you go.
Yeah, no, I'm not leaving her anywhere ever again.
Yeah.
Just, like, strap her to my body and we'll go everywhere together.
There you go.
So other than that, yeah, we're doing okay. I have a cold again. I've been sick 3 times in the last 2 months. I think I killed my immune system over the holidays or something. I made the mistake of going on a plane. I have to get sick when I go on a plane. So anyway, okay. Blah, 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 blah. Thanks everyone for tuning in to my updates. And if you're watching on YouTube, please do us a favor and like and subscribe. It's pretty easy. You just use your little finger and click the buttons. And if you have questions and comments, please use the super chat so that we see them. What's been on your radar this week, Mary Lou?
Today, I've been obsessed by the 3 children in the Congo who ate the bat, and now everyone's dying of hemorrhagic fever. Be aware of this?
I know. Tell us what's going on. I've completely missed this.
Well, I can't find more information than the same recycled story all the time, but it said 3 children ate a bat, and then they all got a hemorrhagic fever, and now hundreds of people have died of this hemorrhagic disease, or at least 50 people have died, and hundreds of people have gotten it. And I just keep thinking about it of, well, one, why do I know about this? Like, do I need to know about kids eating a bat in the Congo and local people, like people in the Congo dying from something being spread by the kids eating the bat? But I'm also like, why did they eat the bat? How do they know these kids ate a bat? What, like, the whole thing is so fascinating. Like, if this is going to come across my radar, I want more details. I really need to know more about what's happening, or I need to know nothing about what's happening, right? Like those are in my ideal world, I would either not know about this, or I would know everything about this. And instead, I just keep seeing the same little story that I find fascinating. So
it's so frustrating because, yeah, you would want a lot more detail, because I also am wondering why these kids would eat a bat.
I know, right?
Like, is that normal? Do people eat bats there?
Remember at the beginning of COVID when we were all
right?
told
That's how COVID started, because of bat eating.
Yeah, exactly. Someone ate a bat, and it's just what happens. Where I don't think of bats as a traditional food anywhere. Maybe they were hungry, but I thought people just don't eat bats. But yeah, I remember with COVID that it was just it was racist to say that maybe the virus came from the coronavirus gain of function research lab in Wuhan, China. That was considered racist, but it wasn't racist to say Chinese people eat bats, and that's where it came from. So that
they're dirty and unclean.
Yeah.
It's a sanitation issue because those people over there aren't sanitary and they eat bats. Like
they're
crazy people. They're so kooky.
Yeah.
I believed that at first. I believed everything at first. I had no idea. Now I believe nothing. That changed everything for me. I'll
Well,
never
maybe-
believe anything ever again. Did we go to the
happened.
moon? I don't know.
I don't know. Did President Nixon make a phone call to the moon?
Yeah, on a telephone.
On a telephone, on just a landline.
I know. Curiouser and
Maybe.
curiouser.
I know, exactly.
Like,
Did
it does
humans-
look kind of janky.
It does.
that ship or whatever, the part that landed on the moon.
It does, yeah. So I don't know if the bat eating is correct. I don't know why it's in the news. I don't know why I know about it, but it has been occupying too much of my mind space today. And then I've also been thinking about the measles, because there is a measles outbreak here on the West Texas, Eastern New Mexico border.
Because of the anti-vaxxers.
Everyone is
You guys
blaming
did
RFK
it.
Jr. We did it. RFK Jr. did it. This is at least the 5th measles outbreak that has been on, happened in the United States since I became a healthcare provider. Every 4 to 6 years, there's a measles outbreak. There was just a death today, though, and now everybody is calling for the death penalty for anti-vaxxers in the comments section of the New York Times. So that's on my radar too. I'm like, this is going to be a just such a politicized issue. People are just really getting all riled up about the measles. I'm old enough to remember when people weren't afraid of the measles. That vaccine didn't become mandatory as part of the childhood vaccine schedule until I was well into childhood. I didn't get a measles shot till I went to college. My husband had the measles. He's just a few years older than me. Almost everybody over 60 in the United States has had the measles, and people weren't terrified of it the way they are now. But now everyone is so afraid of measles, and it's going to be just a nightmare if this keeps spreading. It'll be just a political nightmare.
I don't think I ever thought about the measles once in my entire life. I don't think
No?
I know anyone who got the measles. Not firsthand. I mean, my mom probably had the measles when she was a kid or something like that. But I don't know. Yeah, it's not been on my radar much. I think I don't know. I don't think there's the only disease that I was ever genuinely scared of in my entire life was AIDS, and that was because they made us watch Kids in high school, and we were terrified. We were all terrified. I was terrified for years. I think like every time I had sex, I would be terrified that I had AIDS. They really
completely
scared the crap out of us with that
Can
one.
you imagine if we were still living through that and you've had 3 colds in 2 months?
I know. I would
you definitely have
for
AIDS.
sure I have AIDS. Every time I got sick, I was like, I got AIDS.
Every single time. Every time I had a sore throat in college, I was sure I had AIDS. And even though I was so afraid of AIDS, and AIDS was 100% fatal back then, I continued to make bad sexual choices.
Oh yeah,
that
same.
put me at risk of AIDS. So
I didn't change anything about my behavior.
Right? So intense.
It's so weird.
Yeah.
Oh, humans.
I was really afraid of AIDS. I told you, I think I told you I got kicked out of my Facebook alumni group from my college for making a joke at the beginning of COVID about that phenomenon. And it was at the beginning of COVID. Remember the first few months when everyone was so afraid, the fear was everywhere. I'm working in healthcare. I just like getting my head around, I'm just going to die alone on a ventilator. Like this was like a massive fear campaign that we lived through. And all the people on my alumni list were absolutely terrified of COVID. And I joked, all of this corona phobia is making me reminisce about college, where every time I had a sore throat, I thought I had AIDS. And I got kicked out, which is true. Which was
That's
worse
funny,
than
though.
COVID. Like your odds of dying.
Way worse.
Yeah,
Way
100%.
Like
They were
legitimately
100%.
scary because there was no cure for it then.
Everybody
or whatever.
got it
There
died.
weren't meds that would ensure that you would survive and live a long
No.
life.
There was AZT that made it worse, you know. Anyway, that was a much bigger epidemic to live through, a much scarier thing. But we also weren't being told that, what's now called vanilla sex, just like heterosexual intercourse, is actually pretty low risk for AIDS.
I know they couldn't tell us about that because that's homophobic to say.
Right.
I mean that it's a gay disease, which I realize sounds offensive, but it's mostly true. And, it would have been handy if they'd informed us of that so that we weren't all just constantly terrified. I mean, whatever. I suppose there's some good to being afraid of STDs, STIs, I suppose they call them now. But yeah, several people in the live chat are pointing out that Fauci was complicit in all of that as well. Which I guess I'm only just learning about this now. You probably know more about it than I was. But what was it that he suppressed drugs that could treat HIV because he wanted to push something that he would benefit from, profit from, or something along the same lines as what he did with COVID? What happened?
Yeah, there's a lot of fishy stuff there. I'm not sure how deep down that rabbit hole I want to go, but I know that AZT was not a good drug and it tended to make people worse, not better. And my perspective, just being a midwife at the time in the 90s, was watching pregnant women getting court-ordered AZT. Pregnant women with AIDS were given court-ordered AZT, which made them much more likely to die of AIDS as a young mother, because they said that it was against the law not to take the med because they were saying at the time it would prevent your baby from having AIDS. Yeah, very, very scary times. It's funny how everyone forgot. Our whole generation seemed to forget about the AIDS epidemic we lived through during COVID. They're like, this is the worst disease we've ever faced in our lifetime. Like, no, remember AIDS? That was a big deal.
Yeah, it's scary how quickly people forget things.
I know.
And I say that as a very forgetful person. But I think I remember patterns. Like, I think I'm a big picture person. I'm bad at remembering details, names, words, things like that. But I remember vibes.
I feel and also I'm interested in history.
Yeah.
And I thought that we were all told to learn history so we wouldn't repeat it, but it doesn't matter. Even the people I know who were history majors still seem to not see the patterns and see history repeating itself.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are the things I've been thinking about. I also woke up to the Trump Gaza AI video, and that occupied a little too much of my head today too.
I found it very amusing. I know that I'm maybe not supposed to be amused by these things, but I was like, this is pretty funny, because what I'm imagining is that somebody sent it to Trump and he thought it was funny, so he posted it. And then, several people have sent it to me since I think I saw it yesterday, and we're like, WTF? And I'm like, I find it almost impossible to not be entertained by this.
That's my whole process. I was like, this is very catchy. I find it entertaining. I find it a little bit horrifying that we have a reality star in the president, the role of the president again. I also had to sit with this. Like, people are like, this is terrible. Look what he wants to do. But we live in a world that's always been corrupt, where kings and men with power have always done what they want. And why would it be worse for Gaza for it to turn into a Trump tourist colony where people had jobs there? Like, why would that be worse than what the people have now?
I know. I don't understand. I don't understand any of it. Because, A, funny, entertaining, silly.
Yeah.
B, it would be great compared to what's happening there now, right?
Yeah. It absolutely would be better. Do I think it's just or fair or the way it ought to be? No, but we don't live in a just, fair, ideal world. And I think it'd be better for these people to have Gaza turn into something like a Trump casino strip than to be what it is now.
Well, would they be able to keep the Gazans there? I think there's some concern that, I'm not saying this is my opinion, I don't know enough to have some big opinion on this, but I think there's some concern that, if all the Gazans stay there, don't they still hold the same beliefs in support of Hamas that they do now? Or I don't know. Are people in Gaza just going along with Hamas because they have no other choice, because they're dealing with a terrorist group of unelected scary thugs. I mean, it seems like Hamas actually does have support from the population. I don't know what they would do with the population. I don't know where else they would put them, but
like Judaism and Islam don't get along, right? They never have. Like they and I don't know what's possible. I look at what's happening in Dubai or United Arab Emirates, and I think there's a growing modernization among the very rich in these Muslim countries that want to modernize and get in on the gravy train kind of stuff and be modern and have a lot of money and be like Dubai. So I don't know what's possible.
I suppose it would be better for them to be living in an American colony than to be shipped off to an area where there were more Islamist extremists. I don't know. I'm not
probably
an expert in this
yeah
area,
like put
so
them
I
all
shouldn't
in.
really be speculating. Maybe if they had good jobs and shiny things, they would be less anti-West.
Maybe I don't know what can happen. It's a like Nina Bailey's amazing little "This Land is Mine" video. It's just been a place of turmoil and war and constant turnover of rulership for so long. I don't know what can happen there, but yeah, and I think the Gazans have deep grudges. I look at my own deep grudges. Like I've been examining myself a lot of how much I enjoy watching the people who tortured me during COVID get owned by Trump. And I'm not proud of that, but I
enjoy it too.
Yeah, I enjoy it. And I don't, I'm not proud of that, but it's just a human response. And I think, oh my gosh, these people are so much more angry and have suffered so much more under
and celebrate death. I wouldn't celebrate death. I don't want people who were wrong about COVID and who behaved like shittily to me or whoever else. I don't want them to die. I wouldn't be like joyful and parading their coffins through the streets as they did recently over there.
No, and I honestly don't even want their freedom of speech taken away, even though that's what they want for me. But I would
laugh a little bit. I'd be like, but totally. I don't want it to happen. I want everybody to have their free speech genuinely.
Yeah, there's a piece of me that
amusement.
I'm amused.
Like, if you get censored.
Yeah. Oh, wah. Yeah. Like, oh, you policed everyone's pronouns for the last 8 to 10 years. And now you're upset that you're getting, you're getting censored you're getting kicked out of the platform for not saying Gulf of America. Like there's a piece of me that's a little bit happy about that. But yeah, I think what's happening in Gaza is much deeper and older. And there is a celebration of the death of Israelis. Look at what just happened with the return of the bodies of those children.
Like they were so disgusting. So disgusting. They used it as a propaganda campaign. They put on this big performance for the media to celebrate the deaths of these babies.
I know.
These kids, these hostages who
were disgusting.
Who were essentially tortured. I mean, I don't know all the specific details, but the circumstances that they were being kept in would constitute torture either way. I think.
Kidnapped and murdered. And then I know the people who can only see the Palestinian view of like this is, it's war, it's horrible. And they're like, well, what about all the dead Gazan children? But it's not comparable to the celebration of death and the, having children dance on a stage to celebrate other children's bodies being paraded around in coffins. It's really gross.
Yeah, it's really gross. And I mean, this is such a cliche to say out loud and should be obvious, but I mean, people have really lost their moral compass if they can't see and admit how barbaric and really evil this is.
Yeah, it's an issue. And of all the I'm not a big fan of patriarchal monotheism in any form. I think it's a big problem in the world. But of all the patriarchal monotheistic faiths, Islam is unquestionably the worst. It's just oppressive at the core. I agree with Ayaan Hirsi Ali that it's irredeemable. Like, you can't turn it into anything that is an okay faith to run a country by.
No, it's I think it's inherently dangerous.
Yeah.
Martyrdom is inherently dangerous.
Totally.
And so does that mean you don't agree with Brianna Wu's analysis of Terfs being besties? I hate that word. So the fact even that he said that and used that word is grossing me out. And then I had to use it in my response tweet, which also grossed me out. But do you disagree with Brianna Wu that Terfs and Islamists are totally the same ideologically and besties are totally aligned?
Absolutely. At this point, I feel like I just disagree with everything that man says on principle, because I hold him in contempt. It's just his entire persona is so contemptuous at best, right? He's just disgusting. Yeah, I thought that was a bad analogy on his part.
It's so stupid. I mean, it's just, he's so stupid. Like, I don't think he's an intelligent person. I keep calling people stupid and then being like, okay, Meghan, you need to stop calling people stupid because it doesn't help. Like, that's what they did. That's what the Democrats did to Trump voters. That's what, progressives in Canada did to the convoy people and the people who protested the mandates and the mandatory vax. They act like they're these stupid, ignorant rednecks. So me going around saying that people are stupid isn't going to help or change anything. But I also think that in this particular case anyway, Brianna Wu, like, we're dealing with a narcissist. I don't think he cares what anybody says or thinks about him at all, ever. I don't think narcissists are self-reflective or concerned with other people's opinions of them, because the narcissist is always right.
He's deranged. I'm so upset that people are giving him airtime when he's disgusting. He's misogynist. He's mentally ill. He admits to being mentally ill from childhood, saying that, he has he admits, he's like, I think there's something wrong with my brain. I'm like, yes, that is why you shouldn't be platformed as a reasonable person, because your delusion has taken over your entire life. You're a narcissistic man with a fixed delusion that you're female, and people need to stop feeding your ego and your delusion.
He has nothing interesting to say. Yeah, and I genuinely, I just don't think he's very intelligent at all. I think everything he says is just talking points, and maybe he's managed to present himself well or brand himself in a particular way. I think I've come to the conclusion that Barry Weiss is so into him because he's pro-Israel.
Yeah.
And so that combined with this narrative around a rational trans and a rational, Democrat who's the only one brave enough to criticize his own side. But I think it's primarily that he's anti-Israel, so I guess she likes him for that reason. He probably sucks up to her a great deal. He knows who to grasp at to claw his way to relevancy.
He's pro-Israel. Yeah, he's just disgusting, and I have to sit with that. I'm sitting with my repulsion with him, and I'm like, am I just being hateful? It's like, no, everything about this man is an insult to women. He's disgusting. And it's no different than asking, a Chinese person to watch a Chinese impersonator be called Chinese all the time. Like, it's no different than race mimicry, right? He's a sex mimic. His voice is so disgusting to me. I wish that he didn't think he was speaking in any kind of female tone or cadence. Like, the way his affectations have been developed are just nauseating to me. This man disgusts me. We're talking about Brianna Wu. Someone's asking. He's
yeah, I want to tell people who missed it what he tweeted for reference. So Brianna Wu tweeted, I posted the link to my response in the live chat there also, but he tweeted, Islamist. This would be what Brianna thinks an Islamist would say. I believe biology defines your role in society. Gender critical, who he's placed the old lady emoji next to because, he has to add some misogyny in there. He can't help himself. The gender criticals are all like, what crabby old prude ladies, right? So the gender criticals, I believe that too. Islamist. I enjoy calling trans women men. Gender critical. Same. Islamist. They are an affront to the natural order and we should eliminate them for society. Gender critical. Are we besties? I mean, the whole thing is just so stupid because it's not, we, i.e., people who understand that you can't change sex and that men can never become women. You call us gender critical if you wish, I suppose. It doesn't make that much sense to me. But, the idea that we believe biology defines your role in society. I mean, I think that's like what feminists have fought for a long time. I mean, in some ways, biology does define your role in society because there's certain gendered expectations that are placed on women on account of being female and on men on account of being men. And, women are always going to be the ones capable of getting pregnant and giving birth. I mean, men and women are going to have different roles in society in a lot of ways on account of their biology and on account of evolution. But I think what he means is that he's trying to imply that so-called gender criticals are supportive of gender stereotyping.
I know he doesn't get it. Like all of the people in that ideology, they have no idea what second wave feminism was actually advocating for, which was exactly the opposite of believing that the performance of gendered stereotypes is what makes you male or female. It's the exact opposite of that. Also, if we're talking about Islam, is he completely unaware of the fact that in Iran, you'll be executed for being a gay male, but the state will pay for your so-called gender reassignment surgery so you can marry a man and not upset the patriarchal apple cart with your gayness? Like we have multiple examples of Islamist countries that practice forced transgenderism on the male homosexual population. In Afghanistan, there's the whole can't remember what they call this terrible tradition of making young boys and young male teenagers wear female clothes and dance in sexy ways, and then they rape these children pretending they're female. Like those are two examples of Islamic traditions that contradict everything he's saying, that are supportive of transgenderism.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's that he doesn't care or, he's just not capable of thinking things through in a coherent way in order to be able to, own the Terfs, I suppose. But, he's also just plain making things up. So, he also says, that Islamists, oh no, my water delivery is here. Crap.
Uh-oh.
Do you mind if I pause you for a second? I'm really sorry. I ordered water like 3 hours ago and they've just shown up now. I'm so sorry. Are you able to chat for a minute?
Okay, I'll chat. Maybe people can give me questions. Sorry.
Yes, ask Mary Lou some relationship advice questions. She's good at it. I'll be right back. Sorry, guys.
Sure. I would love to take relationship advice questions or any questions. Bacha Bazi, that is so disgusting. That is the name of the Afghani tradition of dressing boys and young adolescent males in female garb and then using them as sex slaves. It's so gross. Any questions in the chat? I'm not seeing anything. I'm kind of on the spot. So what else have I been thinking about this week? Something else that was coming up that was on my mind, but it's just been such rapid fire news since the Trump administration started. Hi, good to talk to you. Any advice on how to deal with loneliness in this day and age? Oh, that's a big one. Try to find where the people are. I think that where humans are still gathering is where you want to go to deal with that issue. We're also lonely, and I think that the illusion of social media, it's filling us up like the way junk food fills up your desire for nutritious food, and then it leaves less space for actual nutrition, right? So getting off social media as much as possible to stop filling yourself with that fake socialization, and then get out and find the people, and just, make eye contact and say hello. If there are things that you enjoy doing, look and see if there are any clubs with that. Like, I've been knitting with other women. That's been great. I watch men bonding at the gym and saying hi to each other. Like that's a place for guys to meet each other, and for women too. So getting out, finding where the humans are and going there. Are you guys obsessed about these tariffs, says Trudeau? Yeah, Jim Rose. I'm not sure what that means. It's outside of my lexicon. Oh, what's a reasonable amount of time to wait for your boyfriend to tell him he loves you? Huh. It's just like so many questions coming. Okay. Okay. So I don't know about what's a reasonable time to say you love you, but I would say give it at least a month. That would be my recommendation, though I don't really have any evidence on that. Oh, that's a hard one, Ramona, with the vet industrial complex. There's that vet in the East Mountains that I think will not make you vaccinate and microchip. And I can't remember what his name is, but remember he got narked on during COVID because he wasn't making his patients, the people bringing the animals in, wear masks. And he is in the East Mountains, and he will fix a cat without forcing vaccines and a microchip. There were so many questions, Megan. I'm not sure if I did a good job.
Yay.
I know they were coming really, first they weren't happening, and then they all came in.
Okay, I'm so curious. Are there any that came in that you want to answer that you haven't answered yet?
Well, I answered a few. I think we're good. Do you know if I think we're good for now. We'll see if
did we talk about the kitten and the vax and microchip question already?
I know that one was interesting to me because that's an issue for me when I get pets, when I've gotten pets at the pound, that they're all vaxxed and chipped, and you can't avoid it.
I had to chip Emma and Adelita, and I was really mad about it because Emma is 16 now, and I've never chipped her. But you have to fly to the U.S. now.
Oh, no.
And we fly to the U.S. or through the U.S. regularly enough.
I really think that it's a way to get us ready for that technology, to be like, well, we've been shipping pets for so long. Why don't you just get the microchip that has all your health information on it? So if you get dementia and are wandering, people will know who you are, and they can have your whole health record on a chip. Even though we don't have that with the animals yet, they're working on that with the dogs.
Here's a good question. Should Rad Femme Millennial have another baby at 43?
Yeah, if she's got baby fever and she's in a happy relationship and she wants another baby and she's healthy. Yeah, I think that if you can conceive naturally at 43, you can have a great birth. I don't recommend waiting that long on purpose to have your first baby, but if you've already given birth and you're healthy and low risk and you want a baby, go ahead and try to make one. If you can conceive naturally, you can have a healthy pregnancy. It does increase your risk of genetic things. You've just got to know about that, that definitely you're more likely. The odds are you won't have a kid with Down syndrome or another genetic issue, but it's much more likely in your 40s than it is in your 20s.
Okay, good to know. So the Brianna Wu thing, whatever. I mean, I responded and said, essentially the point that I was making was that Islamists and trans activists actually share a lot of the same beliefs, obviously not all of the same beliefs, but I was just trying to be pointed in terms of responding to what he was trying to argue, which is, you know, that Islamists are very invested in sexist gender roles and stereotypes, as are trans activists. You know, trans activists believe, I've never understood how they've gotten away with pretending that they're into rejecting gender stereotypes, because all they do is embrace gender stereotypes to the point where, you know, if a boy likes pink dresses instead of, you know, the color blue and playing with trucks, he has to mutilate his body to emulate the body of a, you know, well, a woman when he's older, when he becomes close to an adult, because, you know, those gender stereotypes should actually define his biology.
So disgusting. It's the most sexist, regressive ideology of my lifetime, maybe of any period in human history, to say that, you know, they've literally thrown out sex and kept the sexism. Like they've made sexist ideas of men and women the very definition of men and women, and then the transing of any women who stepped out of sexist stereotypes and roles and restrictions in the past, like the transing of the dead women.
And the transing of gays and lesbians.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, oh, you're a young man and you like other men, you gotta be a girl, I guess, because homosexuality can't exist. You must actually be a straight woman. And yeah, of course, vice versa with all these young lesbians who have now been convinced that maybe they actually are boys because they're attracted to women and don't like feminine stereotypes. It's so regressive. It undid all of feminism's work over years in a minute.
Exactly. And people ate it up. That remains the most disheartening part of all of this to me, is realizing just how sexist everyone on the left actually was, that they could believe this, that the performance of sex-based stereotypes is what makes someone female. It's still, I'll never get over it. I'll never get over how depressing that is.
I don't even know if it's that they're sexist. I just think it's so stupid, you know, because I think that they believe, I think that they can't really wrap their heads around the ideology that they're supporting or the criticisms of that ideology. Like, they really just seem to not get it. And they obviously think that they're not being sexist. They think that they're doing the opposite of sexism. I mean, this Ben Ryan journalist who keeps insisting that, you know, he's taking a stand and he's using preferred pronouns. And when I have tried to, I think quite politely, ask him questions in an attempt to challenge him on that position, he just, you know, he recently wrote a little essay purportedly explaining his position, but he doesn't really make any arguments in the essay to explain why it's important to use preferred pronouns beyond that it's just polite. All his entire argument is that it's just polite. You know, he's treating people with respect. That's the whole argument. But that's not an argument, because politeness is really what got us into this mess in the first place. So that's not a strong argument in defense of really, you know, much of anything. If we're talking about something that's so harmful, yes, of course, it's nice to be polite out in the world. And I don't care if he's calling, you know, men who identify as women or women who identify as men in his personal life, he or she, that doesn't make any difference to me at all. But what we're talking about is, you know, he's a journalist. Like, no, there's certain ethics attached to journalism. And I know that those have all been ignored over the past decade by almost all mainstream journalists. But there are, you know, you are supposed to adhere to really quite rigid ethical, you know, to an ethical code as a journalist. And of course, one of those things is reporting facts and the truth in an unbiased way, as best as human beings are able to. Human beings are very flawed and are biased and make mistakes and so on and so forth. But that's supposed to be your aim. So if you're knowingly referring to a man as she in your reporting, to my mind, you're knowingly telling a lie or knowingly misleading your audience. You
can't concede the pronoun without conceding everything. Like it's like, oh, well, this man's actually a woman, but she shouldn't be allowed in women's sports, or she shouldn't be allowed in the rape shelter, or she shouldn't be allowed in women's bathrooms and change rooms. But why? If you're calling this man a woman, you've already conceded the whole argument. You can't. It really is a zero-sum game. Like there is no middle ground on this. If you're going to say some men are actually women, we've lost everything as women.
Yeah. So I think he and other people who choose to use preferred pronouns as well think of it as some kind of like happy medium. We need to all make compromises. And in this case, I think we can't make any compromises. And I don't think we need to make any compromise. I mean, one of my arguments around the preferred pronouns issue has always been that, it's not technically an insult or a judgment to refer to a man as he.
Exactly.
Regardless of how he feels about that pronoun, how he feels about his body or whatever, it is just neutral. The reason that it's now interpreted as an insult and that some people might use it as like a poke to be kind of mean to some man who is dressed in a ridiculous dress and wig and pearls and, frankly, does look ridiculous and looks like a giant hulking man in a dress. Exactly. Is because it's a response to this ideology. Like, it's never been an insult before to call a woman she and a man he. It's just language. It's just neutral. It's just how you refer to somebody in an accurate sense. And I can't figure out why, he used an example in his essay of Buck, let me find the paragraph and read it, actually. Yeah, Buck Angel, sorry. So he says, I'm going to read the paragraph leading up to, I think. So he writes, he knows that sex is binary. He knows that sex is unchangeable, but he says trans people change their bodies to present as the opposite sex in an effort to make themselves feel more comfortable in their own skin. And goes on to say, it is far more important to me to honor a trans person's preferred pronouns than to get hung up on any cognitive dissonance emanating from the subterranean conflict between their biological sex and their gender identity and presentation. Otherwise, you try looking at Buck Angel and calling him she and let me know what kind of cognitive dissonance you wind up grappling with. And I understand that argument because I've often messed up Buck Angel's pronouns because he does sort of read as male, like strange male, but, I don't really care if he's talking to Buck Angel one-on-one and referring to her as he. And I do sort of get that, what he's trying to point out there, like I stumble over that too, specifically with Buck Angel. And, there's probably a few, so-called trans women out there who I might take as a woman and then call she sort of naturally, but that's not the point because first of all, it's a bad example because Buck Angel is not the threat to women and women's spaces and women and girls' spaces. That whole thing is problematic as well. But, I'm saying if you're reporting on a violent male criminal who attacked somebody, a woman, a child, recently I was talking to him about this because there was a story of a male criminal who, there it is. He was arrested for vandalizing and bringing explosives to a Tesla dealership. And all the headlines say, woman accused of repeatedly vandalizing Tesla dealership in Colorado, et cetera, et cetera. And so I tweeted to him and I was like, do you understand now why this matters? Because this is a dangerous male criminal and they're reporting on him as a woman.
Yeah.
But he didn't understand. He was like, what difference do pronouns make in this context? And I was like, well, I mean, you're the one who's saying that pronouns matter. Like, I'm not the one who's making arguments in terms of preferred pronouns being important. Pronouns shouldn't matter, so they should be referring to him as he, because it shouldn't matter. I think you're the one who's saying that it matters when you're saying that it's important for you to refer to this man as she.
It's so convoluted and stupid, and hopefully this person will come around, but he probably won't, because he clearly doesn't understand why this is an issue to women's sex-based rights. But okay, one, this whole I'll use the preferred pronouns when I'm talking to that person is a non-issue, because when I'm talking to a person in person, the only pronouns I'm using are you and yours. I'm not using third person pronouns when I'm having a direct conversation with someone. So the whole pronoun issue of respect my pronouns means I'm going to tell you how to refer to me when I'm not even in the room. This is how you must refer to me when you're speaking of me to others. And that is narcissism. It's totalitarianism. It's just, it's rude. It's not, there's nothing kind or polite about speech police and thought policing. And it's profoundly narcissistic to say, because my feelings matter so much, this is how you must discuss me when I'm not around. That's crazy. So it's wrong. Like when people like Benjamin Ryan say, well, of course, when I'm with that person, I'll use their preferred pronouns. It's a bullshit argument, because when you're in the room with the person, you're not using those pronouns. You're not using third person pronouns.
Right.
B, pronouns matter in news reporting, because we need accurate reporting of who's committing the crimes. Like, males are significantly more violent and antisocial than females across the board in every culture. And that needs to be acknowledged for accurate crime reporting statistics, and also for our own safety. Like, women are being gaslit into believing that men are not more violent than women. And because of when we're talking about when you weren't in the room, of like the lack of actual in-person interaction and everyone just being online, a huge number of young women have been propagandized into believing that men are no more likely to be violent and are not stronger than women. And that's dangerous. And
aren't more dangerous, aren't more likely to abuse or rape and so on and so forth.
And are not significantly physically stronger. And that's important for your safety as a female to know that. And also to know that they are more likely to be dangerous. And then once you've conceded the pronoun in the crime report, how are you gonna argue that this violent male shouldn't be housed with other criminal females? I won't even say vast majority, like they almost universally, females who are incarcerated are in there for nonviolent offenses. You could release every female prisoner in the United States and violent crime statistics, that you could release them all from prison and it wouldn't have a significant impact on violent crime statistics. That's not why females are incarcerated. But males overwhelmingly are incarcerated for violent crime. And to put them in the same facilities as women is so wrong on so many levels. It's obviously a human rights violation to the females, but also the female facilities aren't equipped to deal with that level of violence. They're not equipped to deal with male prisoners. And it's harmful to the guards. It's harmful to everyone in that system to put them in there.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it all begins with politeness. So if you're going to use the argument of, it's the polite, respectful thing to do, then we just are back where we started from, where, these men feel like they're women, so they should be allowed into the women's washroom and the women's change room and the women's, transition house, shelter, prison, sports, because otherwise it's mean and it's disrespectful and it hurts their feelings. I mean, they amped up the rhetoric to say, that they'll become suicidal if you use the wrong pronouns or you don't let them into the women's change room and all of that stuff. But most of it was predicated on, being respectful and not hateful and bigoted and mean, by pointing out that a man is a man no matter what. But Yeah, I don't get it. I think it seems really self-serving to me because, you can say, okay, well, I have, and he says this in his essay, I have trans friends. And so maybe, that's probably impacting his view. I also, he's gay, and so maybe he's sort of interpreting trans as being similar to gay men and the oppression and harm that gay men experienced when the Western world was a more homophobic one. But it's just I don't know. I mean, it's offensive to. I mean, he's rude to the so-called Terfs and all of this.
Oh,
Like he
completely. He doesn't
doesn't
care
need
about
to
our
insult
feelings.
us at the same time.
Yeah.
He tells me that I'm being ideological, and he equates the gender criticals or the Terfs to the woke right. So he said, in the same way that the woke left, these are his terms, the woke left comes after him for criticizing the transitioning of minors, for example. The so-called woke right, who are people like us, who are really stickler about using, correctly sexing men and women. He says that we're both ideological in the same way. He says to me, it's more important to me to be polite or respectful than, to be rigidly, I'm paraphrasing, attached to ideology. And I was like, but I'm not doing ideology. This is just reality,
Right. And it's not polite or respectful to women to call men women. It's
No.
profoundly offensive to all of us. I remember when I first hit peak trans, like in 2014, 2013, and I felt like it was going to go insane. Like it was so upsetting to me to watch this insult to women, to see this regressive ideology taking hold. It absolutely was a threat to my mental health, but these guys don't care about what this is doing to women. Like, I feel like this particular issue, it's almost like it was invented to drive thinking women to madness. Thank God now, talk about it. There are more than 12 turfs in North America. That remember when there were like 12 of us in the whole continent, like fly around to see each other and
we try to have secret meetings so that we could just talk about what was going on.
Back, what was happening to Lear and to Rachel Ivy and Deep Green Resistance, and the way this handful of women speaking out against this had this enormous, well-organized movement of violent males and their female helpers threatening them, shutting them down. It was so disheartening. It remains disheartening, but now it's a lot better because there's so many people aware of it. But people like Benjamin Ryan don't care about the mental health of women who are being demoralized by this sexist, regressive ideology. He can't see that at all. It's just like, why can't you be nice and just say that Brianna Wu really is a woman because he really wants to be, when the guy is a creep who sets off every perp detector in your nervous system. Like, he's dangerous just by listening to his voice and watching him. There's nothing polite about ignoring the women who are sounding the alarm about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general that line of argumentation where, this is polite and to tell the truth if the truth is somehow offensive or upsets a valuable narrative, that whole thing, I would have hoped that we would have learned how dangerous that is over the past decade, but a lot of people just haven't. And we can see that in what's happening. This has been going on in Canada since 2021, but in 2021, it was reported that this went on and there were more erroneous reports, but it was reported that the remains of 215 Indigenous children were found in this old residential school site. And this was reported across Canadian and American and actually UK media, you know, in the BBC and the New York Times, of course, in the CBC and all of those websites. But, you know, alternately, that the remains of 215 Indigenous children were found, or unmarked graves. And then when it came out that no remains had been found and no unmarked graves had been found, but rather ground penetrating radar had discovered anomalies, and some people assumed that those were unmarked graves or the remains of Indigenous kids, and then just went ahead and reported it. Everybody who corrected the story was accused of being racist and a residential school denialist. So that term came into fashion. Because, you know, we were denying all these atrocities that happened at residential schools, but that's not true. It's not the same thing. You know, atrocities did happen in residential schools in Canada. And absolutely. Lots of kids did die. You know, a lot of kids died of tuberculosis. I think they were in poor conditions. I think there was abuse that happened.
Kids were forcibly removed from their families to be enculturated into non-Indigenous ways like that. Yeah, there's plenty to critique, but it's a myth that there were mass graves, right?
There was just no evidence turned up.
Yeah,
you know, they didn't, right. You know, and then there were similar reports that came out on other sites. Like, they didn't excavate. Yeah. There was no evidence of it, and it's more likely that it was something else, you know, like old pipes or something like that. And it doesn't mean that this isn't a thing that happened. You know, I think in the 70s they did discover unmarked graves at a residential school site. I think it is a thing that has happened and maybe would happen, and maybe some of these sites there are the remains of Indigenous children, but they weren't discovered, and it was reported that they were discovered, and then all these people have to correct it, and the media doesn't care, the politicians don't care, the progressives don't care. They ran with this narrative. They put millions of dollars of funding into looking into this. There were mass calls to cancel Canada Day because Canada is so bad, and, you know, we killed all these Indigenous children that were supposedly found. And, you know, Justin Trudeau does this weird photo shoot kneeling with a teddy bear at one of the sites. And that photo shoot actually happened. It wasn't even a residential school site. I think it was a old graveyard, but it was like an old Catholic graveyard. It had nothing to do with the Indigenous or residential schools or anything like that. You know, the whole thing was just a sham, and it's just, they whip people up into frenzies about things that aren't real, I think on purpose, to distract people from real things that are going on, because people then feel useful because they're, you know, acting sad on the internet about colonialism and all this terrible racism in our past, and Canada's so bad, yada, yada, yada. But the result actually is harmful. And it defeats exactly what these people are trying to do, because now people just don't believe it at all. Now people are like, oh, were residential schools that bad? Did any kids die there? No. Like, maybe this is all a grand lie. Maybe these were actually good places. And there are people who argue, I think fairly, that there were good outcomes to some of these residential schools. I'm sure there's more nuanced narratives and beliefs and truth that can be applied to that whole situation. But it is also true that lots of horrible abuse and lots of really bad things did happen and did come from the residential schools in Canada. But because you do things like this, because you're reporting lies and you're forcing people to lie, and if they don't lie or if they tell the truth, they're accused of being racist and bigoted and hateful and dangerous and harmful and, you know, akin to a Holocaust denier, then people are going to be like, well, I just don't believe this at all. Maybe you're making the whole thing up, and maybe these places were great and nothing bad happened and no kids died, and this whole thing is a sham.
Right. I know it's what you're talking about reminds me of did you see the MSNBC lawsuit on defamation this week about the accusations of mass hysterectomies at the immigrant detention center? So was it 2 years ago, Rachel Maddow reported that at this immigrant holding center in Georgia, there was a doctor who was doing mass hysterectomies, who was just doing unnecessary hysterectomies, sterilizing all the women there. And there was a nonprofit, I can't remember the name of it. It had the word justice in the title, that came forward, and they had interviewed a couple of women at the center, and they said, everyone I know has had a hysterectomy. They took the information of just this hearsay to MSNBC. People at MSNBC were saying, well, we need to have more facts and data before we just report on this. But the Rachel Maddow show ran with it and named a particular physician and called him a butcher and said that he was just taking the uteruses out of women, immigrant women, essentially sterilizing them so they couldn't have children, and doing this for no medical reason at all. Well, it turns out when they looked at the statistics, I think there were a total of 5 hysterectomies done over the course of many years at this center, all of them for medical reasons. Some of them were women who had had conditions requiring, or that, where hysterectomy would be the appropriate treatment for that, like, excessive bleeding, terrible fibroids, and that finally got care in the center. And I'm not saying there weren't, dehumanizing things happening in the medical system. I think that stuff happens all the time to women, but there were not mass hysterectomies happening there. And the doctor is suing for I think for libel, for slander, and should win. He absolutely should win millions of dollars. His name has been, his reputation's been destroyed, and it was completely untrue. There was no evidence of it. And everyone jumped up of like, this doctor and the US government are sterilizing immigrant women just to keep them from having children. And none of it was true. None of it was true.
Yeah. Lier just said in the live chat, hi Lier. Everyone went nuts over the mass hysterectomy story. At this point, when we hear extreme things, I always wait for more information before jumping in, but so many are addicted to the rage rush. I mean, that's how I feel as well. I'm just skeptical of everything now, and I'm always going to look for more information, and I'm never going to trust the narrative, which isn't a bad thing necessarily. I mean, we should all look beyond the headlines and try to figure things out through our own research and not just, trust the experts,
right,
or the politicians or whoever. But, I think it's really, really bad when you can't trust journalism and reporters, and not only don't trust them, but just assume that they're not doing their jobs, or assume that they're lying, assume that they're doing the bidding of, big pharma or the government in power or whatever. Like, it's really dangerous because, of course, the whole point of journalists and reporters is to hold those people in check, to dig in and find out what the politicians and the corporations and the powers that be are lying about, and make sure that they don't get away with it. And the total opposite has happened of late. And, so, now, people want to complain about people retweeting misinformation online, but, we're more likely to, and I'm more likely to trust something that I see on X than something that I see on MSN, BC, or like CNN, or maybe even the New York Times, certainly the CBC, certainly most of the Canadian media. I mean, I don't really believe any of this. I'll see a headline and I'm going to go dig around on the internet to try to figure out what's actually going on. And often you can figure out what's actually going on through X.
But among the people who are loyal to their propaganda streams, they won't stop believing the lie, whether it's the mass graves at the residential schools, or whether it's the mass hysterectomies at the detention facility for illegal immigrants. They will continue believing it. It doesn't matter that it's been found to be false, or that there's no evidence this actually happened. They will continue to believe it, and they're going to continue to think it's just a right-wing talking point and misinformation of anyone disbelieving it or pointing out that it's not true. Like the myth persists. And this isn't a new issue. It's not even an internet age issue. Was it Mark Twain that said a lie can travel the whole way around the world before the truth can get its shoes on?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to me that despite sorry, I'm starting to cough a little bit. Despite the fact that, this, has been reported on now over and over and over again to say, there's no excavation, there was no discovery of anything at these sites. People are so still invested in the lie. Part of the reason this came up again is because a BC lawyer named James Heller is suing the Law Society of British Columbia for libel because they published materials in the Law Society's Indigenous training course for BC lawyers. It said on May 27th, 2021, the blah, 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 I'm not going to try to pronounce this word, these Indigenous words that I'm going to screw up, the something something nation reported the discovery of an unmarked burial site containing the bodies of 215 children on the former Kamloops Indian residential school grounds. So he wrote to the course providers a couple months later, pointing out that after 3 years, no bodies. Oh, sorry. So 3 years later, he wrote and said, I got that messed up. Sorry, my brain is shutting down a little bit. Heller wrote to the course providers 3 years later, pointing out that no bodies had been found. And he asked them to amend the statement to include words like potential or suspected, which is, a pretty easy and certainly accurate change to make. He wasn't asking them to say, no atrocities happened at these residential schools, or no children died, or that there are no unmarked graves. And they accused him of being a residential school denialist. So now he's suing them for libel. These are lawyers in training. I mean, you can't have that kind of political, ideological bent when you're supposed to be, really very, very, very careful about details. If you're in law, you're supposed to be paying close attention to detail and to the facts.
Right.
And in his defense, because he's being attacked all over the place as this racist, and he's denying genocide and so on and so forth. Conservative MLA from a Vancouver suburb, I believe, like maybe Squamish or something. I'm trying to remember where she is. She posted on X, the number of confirmed child burials at the former Kamloops Indian residential school site is 0. And she was attacked by, every single BC politician, and even the Conservative Party leader, John Rustad, which, this was pretty disappointing, asked, he said that she should take down the tweet. Like, she didn't say anything offensive in the tweet at all. She just said what I read and then went on to say, no one should be afraid of the truth. Can we trust our legal system if lawyers are no longer free to insist upon the facts? This was in reference to the Heller case. And people are just, it makes me think everybody is insane, the way that people responded to her.
People get very invested in the narrative, and they don't want to look at the facts, that if it might make them have to question the narrative. It's just cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, and it's just so hyperbolic. The BC Indigenous Relations Minister, Christine Boyle, who was actually involved in defunding Vancouver rape relief, it should be mentioned. She's an avid trans activist supporter. She responded to Brody's post. The Conservative MLA is named Dallas Brody, saying there's no place in BC for residential school denialism. This type of truth-seeking rhetoric is nothing more than a smokescreen for anti-Indigenous racism. That was said by Stuart Phillip, who's the Grand Chief of the Union of BC of Indian Chiefs. And this just went on and on, these kinds of response is like, the truth is dangerous. So many people, I'm like, how, are you not aware that what you're quite literally saying is that the truth is harmful and dangerous and bigoted?
Yeah. Again, it's not a new thing. Just look what happened to Galileo. You know, it's an old story. The one that I sit with a lot is the maternal mortality lie in the United States. And I got very invested in the narrative that the United States has the highest maternal mortality of any Western country, and that in particular, the obstetric system is killing Black women. And then finding out, I think it was 2 years ago, that in the 90s, the way maternal mortality is recorded changed, and they started recording any death that happens from the onset of pregnancy until a year after delivery for any reason is recorded as maternal mortality, as though it was caused by the pregnancy or the birth practices or something that happened postpartum. So deaths that have nothing to do with the physicality of pregnancy, the process of birth, with deaths that have nothing to do with pregnancy and birth and postpartum are included in the maternal mortality statistics. And whenever you start parsing it out, the leading cause of maternal mortality in multiple demographics in the United States is homicide, followed by suicide and drug overdose. And that, it just blew my mind that I've been blaming the US medical system for killing women when that's not what's killing mothers during pregnancy or soon afterwards. And I had to, examine that I was excited to run with the outrage, because I do have a lot of critiques of the industrial birth system. And I was quick to believe that there is institutionalized racism in medicine, and that Black women are getting care that is leading to their deaths in the medical system. And really, that's not what the evidence shows. It's, maternal mortality is absolutely much higher in women over 40. It's much higher in women who are sick before they get pregnant. Like, actual pregnancy-related causes of death are higher in certain demographics. But there's no proof that racism is in the medical system is playing a role in increased maternal mortality rates in certain demographics. And that was hard for me to let go of.
Yeah. I mean, and that it's again the kind of thing that makes people just deny that racism exists altogether, because, it's like, well, you guys keep framing all these things as racism that turned out not to be racist at all. So now I don't believe that racism happens. It's just,
Right.
It's totally backfiring on the narrative. I mean, not always in a bad way, because a lot of these narratives around racism were bullshit.
Well, what I'm seeing among Black women is that the incessant repetition that Black women are being killed by the medical system is making a lot of Black women terrified of going into that system. They're afraid they're going to be killed if they go there. And that makes them hesitant to seek care, which is probably worsening outcomes. And everyone who knows me knows I'm not a fan of industrial medicine when it comes to birth. And I think there are a lot of problems with obstetrics. I don't think women in the United States are getting the kind of care I would design for them by any means. And I think women have a lot of reason to be skeptical of the obstetric system. But watching Black women be propagandized into terror is really upsetting. And I think that it's causing worse outcomes among Black women, because now they're afraid to seek care. They're afraid they're going to be killed by the hospital system.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So these people are causing harm to the people that they're claiming to want to protect and defend. Yeah.
And I'm sure that Black women run into incidences of racism in the medical system, but there is not evidence that the medical system is killing Black women at a higher rate, or that there's institutionalized racism. There was also that debunked study that white doctors, that more babies in the nursery system, in the NICUs, die when white doctors are on staff or on shift than when Black doctors are on shift. And it ended up being completely untrue, but it's more propaganda to increase race division and also make people not trust the people who are caring for their children in these horrible situations. Like, if you have a baby in the neonatal intensive care, you need to believe the people working there have your baby's best interests at heart. And if you don't believe that, it makes it really hard to be in that situation. It makes it more dangerous for your child as well.
Yeah. Low key in the chat is asking if we know about the Tuskegee experiments. Did I say that word properly?
Yeah, horrible stuff.
The Tuskegee.
Do you know about the Tuskegee
study?
Yeah, where
I've heard about this vaguely, but no, I don't know all the details.
Where at Tuskegee Medical Institute, they ran this decades-long horrific experiment where they diagnosed syphilis in Black men and then intentionally did not treat them to see how syphilis would progress in the men who had it and to see how it spread in their communities. And it was a horrible, horrible episode in U.S. history. It was absolutely racist. It was absolutely beyond unethical. It was criminal. I don't think there's evidence that that's happening right now, but maybe there is, and people say that they were infected with syphilis, but my understanding is they already had syphilis and were diagnosed and were not treated. And this was after we knew that penicillin is curative for syphilis, and they were not given the cure for syphilis. And the goal was to watch them through this longitudinal study to see how syphilis progressed in their bodies and to see how they spread syphilis in the community. And it absolutely was racist. Absolutely, it was criminal. It was wrong. The issue is, I don't think there's a single person in the United States maybe there's someone in the United States. I don't think there's a single person in the U.S. medical system or the U.S. government who today supports that study, who thinks that was a good idea, who believes that was a good thing to do, versus, there's still in psychiatry people who are glad we did lobotomies because now we found out all of this about how the frontal lobe functions. Like, the Tuskegee incident is universally condemned by everyone in medicine and everyone in public policy in the United States. Nobody thinks it's a good thing. So we can't use it as an example of how the system is still racist. It is an example of horrific historical racism, but it's not an example. We can't say, well, it's comparable to anything that we know is happening right now.
Right. We should probably log off sooner. So if anybody has any important burning questions and comments, please use the super chat. There were a few questions on Substack. One of them being, this was related to a prior question. I mean, I've talked about this a lot, but Dan asks, what was the breaking point when you stopped trying to reason with, identify with, influence, and understand the intolerant left and just decided to go nuclear? Was there a specific moment or series of events where you just said, fuck it, I'm done? And yeah, I mean, for me, you can talk about your story as well, Mary Lou. I mean, for me, there was totally a series of events. It probably, primarily was connected to gender identity ideology and trans activism and then COVID. But, the ongoing attacks on me coming from the left and me being accused of all of these things, racism, Islamophobia, whorephobia, transphobia, every single little word that they could throw at me because they didn't like what I was saying about specific issues. At first it was that I was criticizing prostitution in the sex industry. That was the first time the left came after me en masse in Canada and tried to have me fired from my job via a petition and harassing my employers and coworkers was in 2015. And they claimed that I was guilty of all these various phobias, but they had been trying to get me canned and removed from that site, rabble.ca, for many years, because I was the only feminist socialist in Canada who was writing publicly against pornography, against the legalization of prostitution, against things like BDSM. And all of the leftists who were involved with that website, who were also NDPers and the union people, the labor movement people, they were all pro-legalization. They were the sex work is work people, and I guess they saw me as a threat to that. So there was that. And then the gender identity thing happened, and I, pretty immediately became a big advocate of free speech. All free speech, not just some free speech, including the racist free speech. And then the radical feminists, the leftist feminists came after me. The Terfs came after me in Canada because I was advocating free speech, because I was talking to people that they didn't like, because I was saying things that they determined to be racism, criticizing Black Lives Matter and saying, there's no anti-Black problem in Canada. There's not a problem in Canada of racist police officers shooting Black people because they're racist. Our demographics in Canada and in Vancouver particularly, which is where these women were from, these were women who were working with Vancouver Rape Relief and associated with Vancouver Rape Relief, were calling me a racist. I was like, there's hardly any Black people here. Those just aren't our demographics. This doesn't make any sense. And I was attacked for that. I was attacked because some crazy person at that first event that we held in Vancouver criticizing gender identity ideology, she made some comment about a girl's hair who was Black, and this was in the audience, and they blamed me for not speaking up and saying, and I actually did, once I figured out what this girl had said, it was all very convoluted at the time, but afterwards there was video of it, and I was like, it was a trans activist who said this, who'd come to our event and started spouting off about all sorts of weird stuff, including making this weird racist comment about a girl who didn't know how to take care of her Black hair or something like that. And they wanted me to stand up and say, no racism will ever happen at any of my events again. And I was like, no, I don't control what other people say. People can say whatever they want. If they say something racist, then you say, hey, that was a racist thing you said. I'm not taking responsibility for what everybody says at my events in case somebody gets hurt feelings because somebody says something offensive. Are you crazy? And then, and it was refusing to reject Posey, and talking to people like John Kay and, talking to people who they decided were misogynists or racist or far right or whatever. I essentially, I did stop towing the line. I started asking questions about men who were getting unjustifiably Me Too'd, Stephen Galloway. And then they canceled me and came after me, they're holding an event in Vancouver for Women's Day next month. And the headline or the title for the event is something about, celebrating the success of feminists' fight to maintain women-only spaces in Canada. And I was just like, what? It's like, you lost that fight because you refused to work with anybody who didn't share your very limited leftist radical feminist views, including me. You stopped supporting me. I was the only one practically who spoke out in Canada. I was the only feminist that spoke out and was writing about this constantly and, interviewing women from around the world who were challenging this and building up their profiles and highlighting what was going on with these attacks from trans activists. I was, the only feminist in Canada. I don't mean I'm the only one, but in Canada, as far as feminism went, there's nobody else who was doing what I was doing at the time. And, they won't invite me to speak at their event. I was like, you guys never did anything. You never did anything. You never organized an event about this when I was trying to organize, practically on my own with just a few other women, and we didn't have any resources or funding. and you won't stand next to me because you've decided I'm like some kind of far right racist because I won't toe these specific leftist narratives because I've rejected the left, you know. So that made me, you know, all of those kinds of things made me see the left as just unthinking, uninterested in the truth, obviously uninterested in free speech, you know, against, not just uninterested in, but against independent thought. You know, there can't be independent thinkers. We won't work with people who think independently. You know, if the women like that had been willing to work with conservatives or the right, or just, you know, generally people who didn't see every single issue in the same way that they did, and could just be like, okay, well, we need to fight for women's spaces and we need to fight gender identity ideology, then we could have done something. But they, you know, they refused, and so we lost the fight. We've still lost the fight in Canada. And I've still been struggling to hold events just to talk about this in Canada all these years, and lose the venue every time, and, you know, don't have any funding, so can barely even do it in the first place. You know, it's like there's all sorts of things I'd love to be doing, but I don't have the money to put on these events. And then, you know, the gall to organize an event and specifically exclude me, the one who was fighting this publicly, and really put my neck out on the line, and that you refused to support. I was just like, this is insane. So there's all of that stuff. Just, and, you know, Hillary Clinton losing and then realizing all the lies that had been told about Trump and Trump supporters, stuff like the Karen Central Park incident.
Yeah, that was distressing to watch. Wow.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things, but
yeah.
What about you?
Well, you know, I mean, I was raised right wing, and I ran to the left thinking they had all the answers and they were the correct people, and it was quite an awakening to see that there was just as much insanity and sexism and thought policing and dogma and irrational belief on the left. And no, I just think partisanship makes people stupid. And I just try to be an independent and think for myself. But for me, let's see. Yeah, when the left turned on me on gender, especially when I remember when in my town, before I wrote that open letter to the Midwives Alliance of North America and kind of came on the scene as a more public TERF, I was kind of arguing on Facebook about this issue of what, like, we shouldn't be calling men women. It's dangerous to women and girls. It's, you know, these are atrocities that are happening. And I pointed out that this man in the Pacific Northwest had been convicted of multiple accounts of raping children, and he had just gotten out of jail and was placed in a female halfway house. And I was mad about that. And all the leftists in my town on Facebook came after me of how dare I misgender this convicted serial child rapist. I mean, you have to know that the vast majority of pedophiles never go to court, let alone be convicted. It's hard to prove those charges. He must have been so much worse than what we even knew about to get to that level, like to have raped many children, go to jail for it, get out of jail, which is a whole other issue. And then these people were more concerned about respecting him than the atrocity of this man being housed with vulnerable women. That's when I started suspecting, you know, everyone was crazy on that side. There were so few people who'd speak up. I started seeing the cowardice. All these women on the left would start sending me private messages saying, I secretly agree with you, but I just can't afford to say it. And maybe you should, you know, if you just tone down your rhetoric a little bit, maybe people could hear you better if you just weren't quite so mean about it. And
yeah, if you weren't misgendering, maybe people would listen to you if you weren't, you know, calling him he. But
the same kind of hypocrisy I saw growing up, you know, very Catholic in a very Catholic town, of the number of people I knew who actually didn't believe abortion should be legal and illegal in every single circumstance, but had to pretend to believe that to maintain their social status in this conservative Catholic town. Watching just how both sides are full of cowards. And then I started just watching what's happening with speech. And I think it was the debate you did at the Vancouver Library with Lee, and seeing Lee Lakeman assert over and over again that the left was not for free speech, that she didn't believe in free speech. And that's the first time I'd heard a leftist articulate how free speech was not a leftist belief. And she wanted, criminalization of speech on her terms, on leftist terms. And that seems scary to me. Then I just started looking at history more and realizing I don't want to live under socialism or communism. It goes wrong every single time. I wouldn't deal well with those regimes. I would probably be imprisoned or shot pretty quickly in a communist country, just because I can't keep my mouth shut. Looking at how it's devastated the economy everywhere it's been tried, and understanding that I'm not a leftist. I won't say I'm like completely devoted to capitalism, but I'm more at the point where I just think humanity is flawed, and this realm we live in will never be ideal. And I think any ideology that is dogmatic and rigid inevitably leads to suffering when it's imposed upon the people, and leftism is no better than any of the other ones.
Yeah, I started to see it as all very culty. Like, I was like, this is just seems like a culty religion where no one's allowed to question or step out of line, or you ostracize people and cancel people in really vile ways. And they were doing that. They were purging dissenters, and I was like, how are you going to pretend like you're dissenting against the system, or fighting the oppressors, when you're behaving this way in your own little circles and political groups and unions and everywhere, online, of course.
And it's not just that. It is, the very tenets of leftism I question now. I think that we need to have an honest conversation about whether or not the welfare state has been a net good for people, and what is the role of the state in helping people, and I think on the right as well. I think we need to have an honest conversation about the military industrial complex and the graft and overspending in that, and militarism, and is that a net good? We need to really talk about these things in a non polarized way. And when we divide ourselves into left and right, we never can have those conversations. We can't just really parse it out and sit with it. But I'm not sure what I think about a lot of things I used to support. I'm not sure. Like I said, even though I was on welfare for 2 years as a single mom when I was young, I don't know if that program has been a net good for people. I want to have that conversation. I want to see the numbers, like the revealing of the lies around maternal mortality. I want to explore it all in a way that's not politicized, and classifying ourselves as left or right prevents that from ever happening.
Yeah, because if you take the wrong position, then the left, or whatever side it is, just fully shuts down their brain and then starts calling you names, and anything that you say becomes irrelevant or dangerous, or you're selfish, or you hate whatever group it is. Somebody
now you're Hitler.
Yeah, you're a Nazi. There was somebody on Substack, Andrew, who sent me this link to a documentary called Inside Britain's 48 billion benefits scandal. And he suggested that it might be relevant to what's going on in Canada too. But, it's a critique of the welfare state, because people just get stuck on the dole, as it were. Right. And I like social safety nets. I don't like the idea of, if somebody gets sick or becomes unemployed, there's nothing to fall back on. I think that is something that should exist. I like that idea. But then when there's so many who are on benefits for, mental health, medical, whatever, or, unemployment, and they're getting a better deal essentially than if they're working, then that becomes a problem. And in general, it becomes a problem when people are reliant on the government for their survival, totally reliant on the government for
Right.
everything. And it seems like that's where things are going in Canada. You know, I feel like we're going to end up in this situation where everybody either works for the government or everybody's on some version of UBI. So everybody
Yeah.
is completely dependent on this government that, if, you know, the Liberals stay in power, are trying to be authoritarian. You know, they're and people in Canada are falling for these tricks. Like, I'm sorry to say this, people keep getting mad at me for saying mean things about Canadians, but, you know, there's a lot of people who just fall for propaganda over and over and over and still are believing what's published in the CBC, despite the fact that it's a government funded media conglomerate, you know, like
Exactly. Yeah.
and they've proven to not be trustworthy over years and years and years. Their ideological bias is too strong, and they're doing the bidding of the Liberal Party. And, you know, you shouldn't trust anything that they say, and yet they do. And they're buying all this propaganda about the sudden appearance of Mark Carney and his sudden popularity. And, you know, Poilievre is like Trump, and Trump is bad. So maybe we have to support Mark Carney, who is a globalist. And, you know, he's going to be the next PM without an election. He is, you know, once Parliament's back in session, they've plucked Mark Carney. They've chosen him as the leader of the Liberal Party. So once Parliament is back in session, Justin Trudeau will resign, and Mark Carney will be the new PM without an election. And maybe they'll call another election sooner, or maybe they won't. And people don't seem concerned about that. And instead, they're freaking out about how dangerous Trump is, and Elon's a Nazi, and all of this. They're just hysterical.
Yeah, it's a problem.
About the wrong things. Like,
yeah. Well, maybe we can discuss it more next week.
Yes, I know. I'm getting really tired from all of my meds. Oh, sorry, Jen. Jen, I didn't see this question. What did it feel like being ostracized in front of the bus for expressing your views? How did you find your new tribe? Okay. We should, log off soon. But I think quickly, you know, the first time that I was ostracized and thrown under the bus for expressing my views, it was horrible, and I almost had like a mental breakdown, and it was really stressful and awful. It was just really devastating and stressful. I didn't know if I was going to make it through, but I did make it through. And then the next million times it happened, it just wasn't so bad. You get stronger and stronger as you experience these things, and you survive. And, you know, it's still sometimes hurtful when friends reject you for political views that they don't like, or for stating true facts that they don't like. It's more frustrating to me than it is hurtful, though. Like, I just think, God, you're so propagandized that you're going to reject friends for saying something true because you have been told that this is a racist or transphobic or sexist view or whatever it is. But you just, I mean, yeah, you got to kind of develop a thick skin, and then you've got to try to choose new friends that are not going to do that and aren't going to really give a shit about your politics. You know, even if they don't agree, they're not going to discard you as a bad person because they disagree.
And you meet new, cool, brave people to hang out with, and it's pretty great. Like, I just feel a lot more free now. I don't, you know, I don't care what people think about my beliefs. I'm just going to express them. And I think that you find a whole new world of cool people to hang out with that are not a bunch of backstabbing cowards like your old friends turned out to be. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
All right.
Okay. We're going to get going now. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. This has been Where Are All the Women? I'm Meghan Murphy. This is Mary Lou Singleton. Please, if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. And go find Mary Lou at enchantedfamilymedicine.com, or subscribe on Substack at Mary Lou Singleton. I am on Substack at www.meganmurphy.ca, or just search for Meghan Murphy on Substack. Please, if you like and support my work, become a paid subscriber. It's just $5 a month, and it helps me stay independent and continue working and surviving without having to depend on big advertisers or chase around rich funders, which are things that I don't really like to do if I can avoid it. Yeah, we'll see you all next Wednesday.
See you, everybody.
Okay, take care. Good night. Bye.
Night.
Thanks.